And now, back to the reason we're here. There's a wave of prosperity sweeping across Alberta. The economy here isn't just hot, it is scorching. Canada's only debt-free province, a place of low unemployment and high wages. And everywhere the promise, the best is yet to come. But all this new wealth brings a new challenge: how to turn this economic boom into long-term benefits. Over the next 2 nights, we'll explore some of those issues. We begin with the National Senior Correspondent, Brian Stewart, and a feature report, the Alberta Rocket.
Raw power flowing from oil sand through steaming pipe cities that never rest. Immense bonanza driven by an oil boom and desperate momentum.
One of the things that people really should realize about this province is that it's endlessly dependent on growth. Its capital investment is what really drives the Alberta economy. So you're in a process where to keep the economy functioning, it has to keep growing and growing and growing. It's partly like a person trying to cross a river by jumping from one stone to another, and everything's fine as long as he keeps moving forward. But the instant he stops, starts wobbling, and you never know when he's going to fall in.
So, no pause. Hundreds of the world's largest trucks, each carrying 400 tons of oil-gummy soil, can barely keep up with monster refineries turning out 1 million barrels of oil a day. No dawdling either at the morning coffee rush before work in Fort McMurray. The booming northern city now famed for wild growth, soaring wages, frantic pace.
Is it always this busy, this swirl of traffic and activity?
Always. It's getting busier and busier.
It's work, sleep, and eat. That's it. Right now, I'm on my way to work. I come home, I'll have supper, go out for an hour or so, and go back to bed.
I make tons of money, buddy. As much as I want, and that's bottom line, right? That's the way McMurray is. Fort McMurray is for anybody that has any sort of drive. Alberta, though, I could say that about all of Alberta. It's all the same. Oil is a wonderful thing, and that's bottom line, isn't it, or what?
You've got a really good news story here. You're a success story.
Well, yeah, I come up to town with $500 in my pocket. Look, I'm going to leave with the mill, hopefully.
You came up with $500 and you're leaving with $1 million.
Well, I'm hoping, yeah, you bet. But it's not on, buddy, you don't know how much work I've done in town. It's all piecework too, right? Construction, so it's not a 10-hour day. It's like a 14, 18-hour day some days, right? And so there's the calluses to prove it.
Calluses in Fort McMurray, cascades of wealth south in Calgary. Here 100 firms are riding a stunning tide of oil and natural gas profits, which also fuel construction and high-tech boom. Calgary has seen boom and bust before, but hopes this party is just getting started. If Calgary once had a steak and bourbon image, it's faded. This boom glitters as its growing international fame draws in waves of energetic success seekers who relish the rush.
What do I think the new Alberta is? I think the new Alberta is the land of opportunity. I think that people from all across Canada, in particular young people, are coming here to find opportunity.
It's a lot of fun, a lot of rich people, lots of young people who are actually making it.
For me, New Alberta is a cosmopolitan Canada without really the pretension of Toronto, Vancouver, or Montreal.
Peter Boyd, formerly of Toronto, is among the new breed of successful entrepreneurs. His firm is a high-tech scout tracking down ever deeper traces of oil. He supports the arts, runs a breezy, open concept office. Keeping staff happy is critical amid such prosperity when other jobs always beckon.
Well, we set up this little cafe to serve a healthy breakfast and a healthy lunch every day for our employees. It's just another little perk for start the day off right, start with a little energy. And we've got Joseph here who makes us a great tasty breakfast every single morning. It's a really nice way to start the day. So join in.
I tell you, I wrote a food again. This is a technology called Thin Man.
Boyd feels high energy prices could make this a sustained boom. But oil and gas is always a gamble. Calgary rides high, but can fall hard. Risk intensifies the excitement.
There's more energy on the streets, I think. There's more energy in the parties. It's not just about wealth. There's a spirit. There's a more positive outlook of perhaps a more sustainable business environment. There is a wave of wealth. There's a wave of optimism. New companies being created, new employment being created. It is a robust economy. But we're all pretty cautious still. Nobody's quite swaggering yet, although I'm sure there's a few always. But, you know, we know what happens after boom. And again, we've seen waves of it. Probably 4 waves since the National Energy Program in 1980. So it makes for resilient entrepreneurs. That's for sure.
That mention of the 1980 National Energy Program, or NEP, is bound to come up in Alberta. It was the product of Pierre Trudeau Liberals in central Canada, so the most infamous of all economic crashes. At that time of soaring world oil prices, Trudeau froze domestic prices below market value and capped Western exports. A stunned Alberta lost as much as $50 billion as business, jobs, and housing collapsed.
We've been in receivership for about 3 weeks now. I don't know how much longer we can last.
In Calgary, the Lougheed House, now museum, was the ancestral home of the man who rallied Alberta against the NEP, then Premier Peter Lougheed.
Fellow Albertans, we face a serious situation in this province, as I'm sure you're aware.
His speech, threatening to turn off the oil taps, is still an iconic moment in provincial history.
And I think what's happened is that the Ottawa government has, without negotiation, without agreement, simply walked into our home and occupied the living room.
Was Alberta that badly hurt? Or why are we still angry?
Well, you were the winners.
In due course we were, but we were hurt while it was all going on. We lost many, many jobs. This place was really damaged for, almost a period of 5 years before it recovered. So there was a lot of damage in that period of time. And you're quite right, we worked our way back from it. But at the same time, I think the idea that a federal government would pick on or discriminate against one province, which never really left the people of Alberta. They still have that resentment out of it.
Is there a characteristic prickliness, though, about Albertans? I've heard that when you were premier, when visitors would arrive, you would check their watches to see whether they were on Alberta time.
How do you've done your research? There's a good example. Well, I thought if they were coming in to see the premier of the province and they were coming from Toronto and they'd come and sit down in my office and they were saying all the nice things about how Alberta was so important to their company, and then I'd look down and see that their watch was still on Toronto time, which meant that when they left me, they were going back to their private plane and returned to Toronto, and there was a very cursory visit that they were having, and so I needled them all the time.
The Trudeau program sought to control what belongs to the province, energy. Difficult today. But Lougheed only half jokes when he suggests Eastern bureaucrats will always look at ways, perhaps an environment tax, to snatch at oil profits, to raid the boom.
I can understand the anxiety. I don't share that anxiety except to a degree that they're looking. There's a group burrowed in a basement in Ottawa, and I know they exist, and they're trying to figure out what can we do.
In the cool halls of the Alberta legislature, the new Conservative government in Ottawa brings optimism, but it is tempered, for governments do come and go. And while power may be shifting to the West, generations of leaders here have emphasized the need to be wary of central Canada's rapacious instincts, a hard habit to break. Alberta political writer Mark Lysak believes the province finally needs to move beyond past grievances.
You know, it's become one of the defining features, I think, of Alberta. It's a place that's always cranky. It's a place that always has a beef with the federal government or with the rest of the country. And the Western economy, certainly Alberta's economy, has very much been based on a few basic commodities. And that makes the province different from other parts of the country in a couple of ways. First, it creates different economic interests that have to be protected, but also it creates a real sense of instability and uncertainty about the future of the province economically and politically. There's always this fear that even if the federal government doesn't do something to us, the bottom might fall out of the market. And then what happens to us? And a constant feeling that nobody's really looking out for us the way they should.
This new, largely urban Alberta is increasingly multinational in spirit, with a vibrant cultural community that benefits from high spenders. At the Trepanier Bear Art Gallery, co-owner Yves Trepanier prepares his latest exhibits.
Those little figures?
A former Quebecer, Trepanier was drawn to Alberta 2 decades ago.
People have worked very hard to get to this place. I mean, this money just didn't happen out of nowhere. People rolled up their sleeves and worked at every level. So there is a great sense of pride about living here. And I think increasingly there's a sense that you know, we are part of a country and part of a world.
The new wealth is not just gravy. Hard economic times in the 90s, plus years of Klein government deficit cutting, mean institutions need rebuilding, and vast amounts are required for cities, roads, and services.
We have to get our own house in order first. There is great wealth here, but we did, to achieve this debt-free state, we had to cut back a lot. The cultural community was beat up badly. And there has to be reinvestment in our schools, in our hospitals, in our cultural sector. We need to rebuild our own infrastructure here before we can even start to consider what we're going to give away. And I think those kinds of conversations are going on a regular basis at the university, with private people, to try to get a sense of what the next steps are here. What is the responsibility attached to this vast wealth that we have? What's our place in Canada? How do we make Calgary better? How do we make your own neighborhood better?
In Edmonton, another fundraiser for the University of Alberta, presided over by its new president, Sri Lankan-born Indira Samasekara. On display, some of Alberta's strengths. It's remarkably welcoming to outsiders. Volunteerism is a major force. Edmonton seeks to rival Calgary with its own research and development surge. Both cities have vast long-term plans.
They have a remarkable opportunity to do things that perhaps no other province in Canada or no other jurisdiction in North America has, to set a long-term course for prosperity and social well-being. There is a real civic spirit, and I think it goes back to the origins of this province, the pioneering origins. This was a mighty tough place, I figure, in 1905, and those of us who come from elsewhere, we get infected by that notion, because everybody's pitching in.
No matter how often you hear about the oil sands development, nothing prepares you for the gigantic scale. Canada may not yet realize what it has. Giant $6 billion refineries like Suncor's Millennium site churn and steam atop perhaps 180 billion barrels of recoverable reserves, worth $10 trillion at today's prices. It may be more. Companies are preparing to construct $60 billion of new operations in this area over a decade. With the benefits come high environmental costs. Local helicopter pilot Michael Moran is both inspired and concerned.
I think the biggest thing that concerns me is the potential air pollution. You know, as a pilot, we're up in the air and we get to see the smog a little more than people living in Fort McMurray might. I'm sure they're doing as much as they can, at least we hope we're doing as much as they can to minimize the air pollution coming from the plants. We need to remember that, you know, there is a cost to all this. I certainly don't support stopping any of this. I think this is, you know, the economic future of the country. But we do have to keep in mind that there's an impact on a day-to-day basis.
The boom could be shaken by major declines in oil prices, soaring costs, who knows, even a revolution in alternative energy. But optimists say not anytime soon, that a ravenously growing world economy will long need all the power Alberta can produce. Meanwhile, much wealth does flow out to the rest of Canada in taxes, construction material from Ontario, and wages to tens of thousands of Eastern Canadians who flock to Fort McMurray. Among them, Gerard Power, a Newfoundland teacher who quit to follow his students out to the sand.
I would see their pay stubs and these guys were making twice the money a sec. I had a journeyman certificate in 2 trades, and these guys, as a second-year apprentices, were making twice what I was making.
So how have you found it up here, money-wise?
Money-wise is double what I was making at home.
Not all Alberta is made up of images of power and money-making. There's still extraordinary natural beauty, a keen nostalgic sense of the past. But thought and speculation is dominated now by questions about the effect such wealth and power may have on Canada's fabric, and how the province itself will change.
I think we have tended in our thinking at times to become too insular. In other words, to be thinking internally in the province instead of the rest of Canada. If there's a crossroads question today, it's that issue. I very much am very strong Canadian first, but it needs some work in this province, in my judgment, to make sure that Albertans don't get too smug and too self-satisfied and too inclined to be inward. I hope that doesn't happen.
And there's a lot of chatter generally in Canada about who we are as a country, what our place in the world is. And I think Alberta is a kind of metaphor for that in a way. Because oddly enough, it's still a place that suggests possibility and the ability to dream. It sounds stereotypical and corny, but it's true.
This dream emerges from a titanic dig that hasn't paused 1 minute in 37 years and will gouge at the land for generations to come. I had not known what to expect, but found it mesmerizing in the night haze. Black tar, dazzling light, the otherworldly machines screaming under rich loads, and the deep sense of an ever-growing, roaring force coming our way. Brian Stewart, CBC News, on the oil sands of Alberta.
Well, tomorrow night, why employers here are facing a tough time. There's a serious labor shortage. We'll also meet the man who has the job of selling Alberta to Americans. But when we come back, an update on a story that was big news here in the province just a few years ago.
Grizzly bear hunt is one form of mortality that we do have control over.
How the death of one bear sparked a huge debate in Alberta about the whole grizzly population.
Closed captioning is brought to you by CIBC. CIBC, for what matters.
A few years ago, a story about a grizzly bear made big news in this province, and it sparked a long and noisy debate about Alberta's spring hunt. Earlier this month, the province made a surprise announcement. Tonight, we check in on that debate and what's happened. Here's Kim Trinacity.
Mary was a well-known grizzly, the poster bear of her day. She even appeared in travel brochures and was a part of the community. But in September 2002, a poacher slaughtered Mary and left her to rot. At the time, Gord Stenhouse was the Alberta chief grizzly bear biologist.
Unfortunately, for most of the bears that we've seen around here, I just call it wanton killing. People just pull a trigger.
Mary's killing drew attention to a growing and alarming problem. Roads being built into grizzly habitat for logging, resource development, and even recreation, allowing poachers to get closer to grizzlies. Land ecology.
Closed captioning is brought to you by CIBC. CIBC, for what matters.
A few years ago, a story about a grizzly bear made big news in this province, and it sparked a long and noisy debate about Alberta's spring hunt. Earlier this month, the province made a surprise announcement. Tonight, we check in on that debate and what's happened. Here's Kim Trinacity.
Mary was a well-known grizzly, the poster bear of her day. She even appeared in travel brochures and was a part of the community. But in September 2002, a poacher slaughtered Mary and left her to rot. At the time, Gord Stenhouse was the Alberta chief grizzly bear biologist.
Unfortunately, for most of the bears that we've seen around here, I just call it wanton killing. People just pull a trigger.
Mary's killing drew attention to a growing and alarming problem. Roads being built into grizzly habitat for logging, resource development, and even recreation, allowing poachers to get closer to grizzlies. Brad Stelfox, who tracked the number of roads in Alberta's wilderness, was unhappy about what he found.
It comes down to this. The average Albertan should not be able to go everywhere all the time for all reasons.
We can calculate the dosage.
Following the outrage over Mary's tragic death, the province of Alberta asked Gord Stenhouse to conduct a detailed count of the grizzly population. With a team of scientists, hunters, and industry, Stenhouse was also to come up with a plan to rebuild the population. Not easy, since hunters believe then and now the population is healthy and the hunt should go ahead without limiting access to roads.
Once the road is built and in place, and until the day it's reclaimed, why should we stop people from using the road? We're putting the grizzly bear, if you will, ahead of people's wants and needs.
That grizzly recovery report was finished in 2004 and not very well received.
Word has it that there's very strong resistance to our plan.
Dr. Mark Boyce is a member of the recovery team. Its most controversial recommendation, to suspend the hunt until the population increases.
Grizzly bear hunt is one form of mortality that we do have control over.
The recommendation to limit new roads into bear habitat was ignored. So that today, Brad Stelfox says with the frantic pace of development in Alberta, the problem is even worse.
But the overall magnitude of growth in terms of the energy sector and acreages and forestry has resulted in a continued increase at about 2% per year.
And in January, Gord Stenhouse was demoted from his position as chief grizzly bear biologist after criticizing the government's lack of response to the study. After Mary was killed, the government did shorten the grizzly hunting season, reduce the number of licenses, and dramatically raise the fines for poaching grizzlies. In a surprise move a couple of weeks ago, the grizzly hunt was suspended for 3 years.
I am making this decision because it is one of the changes that we can make today to limit, if only by a few, the female bears that are affected by the hunt.
The first test of the higher fines will come later this year. Last spring, a man in southern Alberta was charged with poaching a grizzly. If found guilty, he could be fined $100,000. Kim Trinacity, CBC News, Edmonton.
Well, we have to take a short break, but here's how to get in touch with us. Now, before we go tonight, here's a look at what we're working on for tomorrow, day 2 of our visit to Calgary.
We're really desperate to try and keep people.
Alberta's labor crunch. Thousands of jobs here can't be filled, and that's forced some employers to get creative.
I'd be quite surprised if we see too many people in Alberta working for minimum wage.
Help wanted. It's Alberta's sign of the times. And
my job here in the Alberta office is to represent Alberta.
He's Alberta's so-called ambassador to the United States, a super salesman pitching one province.
Well, he's very persuasive.
Mr. Smith goes to Washington. That's tomorrow on The National. And that's just 2 of the stories we'll have for you from here tomorrow night. That is The National for this Monday night. Tomorrow on CBC Radio's World Report, how an ugly incident has sparked a positive cultural exchange. Remember, you can get news anytime on our website. The address is cbc.ca. Our thanks to CBC Calgary for their help tonight. We'll see you again here tomorrow. I'm Peter Mansbridge. Coming up next, Natasha Ramsahai with the National Weather Forecast.